Hi, my name is Shlomi Ron. I'm the co-founder of the Visual Storytelling Institute. We are based here in Miami, Florida. We are a think tank that is dedicated to educate business leaders on how to articulate, visualize, and distribute their business stories. And as we all know, a business story is not a business story if you don't have really accurate and authentic reflection of your target audience in terms of their ideas, problems, everything that makes them tick. So that's why I'm so excited today to have one of the great experts in the space of social listening, which is a fantastic research approach in order to uncover your target audience is specific passion, interest, pain points, and so forth. So today we have David Berkowitz. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Sysomos. Welcome to the show, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shlomi.
Excellent. Yeah, so before we dig deeper into your specific thoughts about social listening and where it's headed, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got started in digital marketing. What was your backstory?
The backstory, as quickly as I can tell it, is that the original idea was around 2000. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, and as the internet was really starting to scale, I had this thought that maybe I could get paid to write and not be a journalist. That was the whole idea right there. And I didn't necessarily see writing as a career. I didn't know where it would take me. But the internet needed a lot of content. That part I figured out. It's obvious enough. And so along the way, I started off as a technical writer at a startup. I wound up at eMarketer for years, which was really formative for me as an editor, and then doing PR. And so it's just it got me exposure to anything and everything going on in the industry. And then it gave me just a great entree onto the marketing side. And since then, I've worked for some incredible agencies like iCross and 360i and MRY, and then joined Sysomos last year.
Well, that's amazing. So in essence, you started really from a creative writing perspective, and we all know that writing is really the best ammunition for a marketer to be able to communicate herself or himself. So that's a very interesting trajectory. I was actually in New York early in my career too. I started at Ogilvy and Mather, their interactive unit, and then spent some time at iTraffic, one of the early media planning and buying agencies. So yeah, no, definitely great times. So when you think about visual storytelling, this is a question we pose to all our guests because obviously it's a quite fairly new discipline, as borrowed from the entertainment world and brought to marketers in order to help them rise above the noise. So how would you see from your perspective, what is your definition for visual storytelling?
Well, I think in some ways visual storytelling is really very old, because we go back to the caveman pictures, and so in a way humans have been doing this for 15, 20,000 years. And then even if we looked at some of the earlier forms of advertising, like the murals that were painted on the walls in France in the 1800s that became the first billboards. And so, so I think that especially for those who like to tell stories, and that includes most people who gravitate toward the marketing and advertising field, and then I think there's a real hunger and appreciation for visual storytelling. So I think we've never had scale like this, and what we've also never had in the history of mankind was billions of people with the tools to be able to distribute their own visual story. And so this is what I think is totally different today from any other time in history.
Yeah, no, and actually when I did some research in preparation for this talk, I actually came across a slide share on your LinkedIn profile. You wrote something about a story about the end of storytelling that I really liked. How that came about, if you can tell us a little bit.
Well, it came about fittingly enough from a conversation I was having with my wife, and she was complaining about some people. They might be people I'm related to, and I don't need to go and use this as a psychological session right here. But she was complaining about the people. She said all they do is tell stories.
Yeah.
And I just kind of froze there. And I looked at her, I'm like, wait a second, every conference I go to, the storytellers are the heroes, right? The future of storytelling. I'm on one panel after another, and it's like, like storytelling this and that. And I'm like, wait, you're using it as a bad word? And it was amazing because clearly I also did something I do all the time with my wife, and that I take something that she says it's about her and I turned it into something about me. And but then I started asking her, I'm like, about stories of brands that she knows, and it was just this eye-opening thing because she wasn't telling me brand stories, she was telling me her own stories, and this I think encapsulated a lot of the problems in our industry where we have people, whether it's marketers creating campaigns or people internally in a lot of these creative environments who are talking at others, and now having this opportunity to listen to others and incorporate other stories and acknowledge that if you're Coca-Cola, for instance, you might have billions of people who don't know your story, but you might have millions and millions of people who have a Coke story, who could tell you about the best Coke they've ever had, right? And, you know, a time they were celebrating and Coke was a part of their life, and they remember it. They might remember it for decades. To me, that's like if I could ever be part of a brand that has that kind of an effect on people, I mean, my gut would be to just stop trying to go push my story down their throats. And Coke's credit, they've actually changed their market quite a bit.
Right. Now that's kind of interesting, and I know that we kind of also exchanged some perspectives about that, because I also published a blog post about are you a story maker or a storyteller, and it's really we actually use in our framework, our first phase is story making. Really, when you create your business story, then you story visualize it, and then you story tell it. So in my perspective is really, and this is to your point about viral communication, you know, how stories are passed from one person to, so it could be from a brand to a consumer. But yes, the brand is a storyteller at the get-go, but once, you know, the recipients get that story and, you know, likes it and maybe creates his own spin to it, it becomes a story maker by his own right, and then he storytell it forward. So I think we both, you know, wear the hat of storyteller and story maker by definition. It's just our functionality of how we pass information.
For sure, and I mean, for brands to have their own opportunities to scale those stories is tremendous, right? Like there are some of these brands that have always done well and can just keep doing better now that like you have so many more platforms and media properties that individually can reach hundreds of millions of people, some of them billions of people.
Right.
Brands are in a position to scale those stories unlike they've ever been able to do before, and so that's tremendous. It's just like it's just building on some of those things that have made great brands while adapting to totally new media and totally new ways that people are actually interacting with these kinds of companies.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we start kind of going deeper, you know, as Simon Sinek, starting with the why. So if somebody is listening or watching now in the future this video, and they want to get, you know, why they should care about social listening today, what would you say?
I think the biggest opportunity for social listening is really around empathy. And so it's now when you could start understanding on a very deep and honest level what people are talking about, right? is rough, right? You know, like
Yeah.
when compared to how agencies like an Ogilvy or an MRY would, pitch things to clients in this beautiful little bow. You know,
Yeah.
when you start getting into social listening and you see how people are talking about brands, or just how people are using language. Yesterday, I was doing a live demo at a university, and I had to keep filtering out the searches because there was all this stuff like beyond all these curse words and beyond all these like drug references and things like that. And then you start getting into just weird things like now when like I was having a hard time thinking of a brand that isn't political right now, or that wasn't a prop in some political conversation. So it's like to start, first of all, accepting that what you think people are saying about, it's like actually going to be that 1% about the product features you're talking about, and it's going to be all this other stuff. So just to try to get a real sense of where you fit in the world is unbelievable. And then as we start opening up opportunities into visual search in particular, to be able to understand what are the images being shared, the really exciting thing there is that people aren't necessarily explicitly referencing the brand. Maybe it's a logo on a T-shirt. Maybe it's maybe there's a package of something behind me here that I'm not even thinking about right now. But it's in the room. It's getting that exposure. I might not even realize I bought something earlier in the day, and it's right there in the frame. So this is something, especially when you get this like really raw, like brand isn't mentioned at all. No one's trying too hard to go and be an influencer and manufacture it. And you see this sometimes when you start shifting the focus to talking about topics and not just the brands themselves. So so if you want to hear what people are saying about about some of the issues around climate change, for example, then and you might be surprised to see how brands come and play a role in that, and some positive and some negative and things like that. But it's like once you start expanding your focus and what are these real drivers, and where do brands fit in, or even in a more tangible even in a more tangible scenario where like you have people talking about childcare, you have parenting, just doing housework, and you want to know like okay, what are they really complaining about? We have a customer that's a paper company that does a lot of social listening to hear how people complain about a restaurant bathroom. Like that's a big part of their job.
Yeah, no, this is so fascinating, and I really like your comment about social listening. For the most part, is a way to create an empathy with your audience, because at the end of the day, your messages are not going to hit the mark if your audience cannot see themselves in your stories. And it's really like the basics. But we actually use in our workshops a tool called Empathy Tool. And it's really kind of breaking down, I don't know if you're familiar, but it's really about the fact that people tend to say one thing, but they feel different. So it's really the feel, think, say, and do. And how do you actually break it down in social listening exercise when all those 4 quadrants not necessarily align?
And it's it's a pretty important distinction, right? I mean, we just had we just had an election where a lot of people said they were going to do one thing and really did another. Like this kind of thing on the macro scale can change the world and totally upend your expectations of it. And on a micro level, like these kinds of things happen every single day. I think you read the book Everybody Lies.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's all about that. It's great.
Yeah, no, so that's a really fascinating, because we know human behavior is really multifaceted. People express their opinions, in a very kind of segregated manner. That's, some stuff they reveal, some stuff they think completely the opposite. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of that. So when we think about social listening, obviously our audience is comprised of marketers and digital folks that, let's say, are about to get ready for a new product launch and want to do some social listening. What are the common business objectives marketers would use social listening for?
Well, there are quite a few of them. I mean, some of it is just very cut and dry things like competitive intelligence, just trying to understand the brand landscape better. In that kind of context, it often complements market research. So it might be used as even in a more immediate way to gauge some market research. And beyond that, though, there are sometimes it could be for sales support, right? Like so, the paper company I mentioned that's analyzing what people are saying about other bathrooms. Like their sales team can then go into those restaurant chains and say, look, like we have this data for you. Like you might not realize that this is going on, and so now it could totally change. It makes the whole sales process far more meaningful and actionable. There are a lot of brand defense ways that people are using social listening. We currently right now have one major tech company that has a geofence around their CEO's house. Oh, wow. And so anytime that there are mentions within, say, a mile of this person's house, then the security team, not the marketers, are the ones who are actually paying attention to this and can see. Now, like they're not going to be able to track everything that way, but anything that's public, then it minimizes surprises. Similarly, we had a TV network that was worried that a season finale of one of their biggest shows was leaked, and because they were ready for it, because they were looking not just for the show's name, but any permutation of different kind of things about what the pivotal moments were in that episode, and someone was killed in the episode, so it was like an especially salient thing, that they were able to go and pinpoint. It was actually a random blogger who surfaced it, and they got it taken down within minutes. And so, yeah.
Interesting.
But a lot of it is being ready. It's like you're always going to have the unknown unknowns, but once there's some things you know whether to look for, then it's like you just need to be able to start plugging this in and training people for what to look for.
Yeah, it sounds like almost like Minority Report, right?
A little bit of that, but at least for better and for worse, and generally for better for consumers, is that there are limits to what you can track, right? So so Twitter's easy, Instagram is so. Facebook is incredibly hard to get data out of. Snapchat's impossible. So you have that slide and scale, and any platform can be put on that scale. And there's sort of like kind of a two-axis scale there, because one is how public the information is, and where Instagram basically falls somewhere right in the middle of that. It's got a big split between private and public users, but there's also the aspect of how easy can you do they have APIs? Can you get information out of them? Can you work with them? And so it's so there are some kind of upper limits as to what marketers could access, even if they had access to everything public.
Right. So it sounds like it's really, as you said, customer service is a use case. Obviously, before you launch a new product or service, that could be a good way to kind of beef up your persona building of your target audience. And then you said something interesting about security, and which is kind of interesting. Reputation management, I would think, is another one. And one of the things that I also kind of came across in an interview, that the campaign team of Trump of last year, they've been using social listening a lot, and they actually was were using keywords that the base was using in his pitch. So when he talked, they actually heard themselves. It was their
Smart.
So that's kind of interesting on the political domain. Yeah, so now we understand a little bit about the business objectives of how to use social listening. What would you say, since you've been working with a lot of brands, what is the common challenges marketers have today? You know, the kind of things that they still need to do a better job at in social listening?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is ultimately going to be just making the case to do more of it, and to and some of that is the ROI story. You know, so it's like once you're in that TV network and you're in that scenario, and then it's like that's it. You're going to be hooked, right? Yeah. So recently I ran a story on Rick Reed over at Intel, and he's been working with them. He comes more from the crisis communications background, and he's been working with them for 20 years, well before there were tools like MyAvailable, well before there was social media at scale to monitor. And so, but like he's been building this practice before most people even have heard of social media. But ultimately it's like, so they've got, like, they literally wrote this book on just how to set up a social media policy that anyone can find. For most people, it's still this like, okay, it makes sense, right? You know, if you're an agency, it's nice to have this on pitches. How do you use it in a way that's going to actually increase your win rate on a pitch? You know, these kinds of things. If you're a brand, if you're a B2B brand, how do you sell more from it? If you're a B2C brand, how do you how do you funnel this into R&D? How does it become more than just a day-to-day, need to have tool for customer service reps that actually start changing the nature of the business. Like basically that big question of, once you have one department that is sold on it, could be marketing, could be sales, could be research, could be customer service, could be security, then how does it go from one department to the other? Or if you're an agency and you have it in one office, right? You have it in the Miami office. How do you get the LA office to get on board with it and to like speak the same language? Stuff. Or if the Miami office is working on Ford, then how do you get the LA office working on Toyota? You know, it's really those I think are the perennial challenges with something like this.
And what about, even from from day one, creating the business rules and knowing how to configure it, how to ask the right questions, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, I have used these social listening tools for so many years, and then once I got into this mode, then I start seeing just how much one can do with Boolean search, and how big a deal this is. And it's like once you meet an expert in something like that, and I've worked with a number of strategists, and I see them in action. It's like this is amazing, right? The information that they're able to get out of this, and often when I'm using our own tools, I feel like this rookie that's just trying to keep up. But you start getting a sense of it, and that is knowledge that for once you start doing it, it becomes so applicable to everything else you do. It's like you start getting the hang of it, and then you start spotting things right away. You're like, okay, got to weed at that, got to target this way, and then once you realize that, say, you can geofilter around someone's app, like you're just never quite the same. So and expanding best practices of that is tricky, and we're even working on having that more intuitive within the tool itself. There were things that I saw initially that I'm like, like we were almost burying the lead to some degree because some of the best material we had to get people ahead of the game, that you could even just like copy things right in there and start honing it. Like one of my favorite ways, for instance, to use Boolean search that I learned about soon after I got there was how to use it to determine where people are in the purchase process.
Right.
Yeah. And so the language like around research and should I get this versus I'm buying this, what do you think of this versus this, and versus I just bought this and now have, like, you could start targeting people at very specific steps along the way. And even if you're a relevant brand there, then your interactions with someone can be wildly different. So you could actually, and if there's some kind of scale around that for you, you could really get a sense of like, oh wow, in November, all of a sudden we're seeing a surge in people who are now just starting their purchase process for something in February, and it's just tremendous.
Yeah, no, this reminds me of my days at IBM. For every major product launch, we would go and kind of develop our keyword search list and develop our questions for our social listening campaign, and that's how we were able to extract this pre-launch intelligence, so we can craft a more relevant messaging and do something that it makes sense to the audience. So
yeah,
it's really like, if you kind of try to visualize this, it's like somebody that you meet for the first time and you know zero thing about him. In order for you to prepare for that meeting, you probably check him out on LinkedIn. This is like a very small scale example of how you do social listening, and probably get to know his likes, his dislikes, and when you meet with him, then obviously you start throwing stuff that you came across, and the guy say, hey, he really understands me, he gets what I'm all about. So the chemistry is easier, and communication, I think makes sense from that aspect.
Yeah, though I also discovered when Pinterest first came out, I started looking up some of our clients who were using that, and I actually felt like I knew too much.
Yeah.
And now here's like the dream wedding that they're planning, and places that they hope to be before they die, and inspirational quotes, and I was like, I really just stopped doing it because I'm like, this is too personal.
Yeah.
If you're a brand, you can never have too much information about your audience, but it's like it's just amazing. That's why sometimes, okay, I'll do LinkedIn, and I'm not going to check out Facebook.
Yeah. No, that's exactly that. I mean, it's amazing how much information you can get today because of our sharing economy. Everybody putting their hearts open and kind of divulging this information. So one interesting aspect also when we talk about social listening, obviously text is really the core handles for you to, it's almost like going fishing, and the text is your easy bait where you can actually pull information from, right? But obviously content today is not just text. We're talking also about images, videos. So, and this is a connection I'm trying to make. Maybe you could help me, how social listening ties into visual storytelling, because obviously there's a lot of visual stories that are surfacing on different platforms. How can social listening take advantage of them?
Yeah, well, this is where you get into things that aren't quite as off the shelf, and like I think this is also where all kinds of social listening are going. And so it could just be at the start monochrome logos, but it's starting to get far more sophisticated than that. You start getting into different octave types, scene things, food types, all kinds of things that are in the frame. It's going to start reading people's emotions better that they express within them. So and ultimately it's just unlocking all new kinds of opportunities because most of the time people aren't tagging every single brand. They're not
Yep.
intentionally referencing it, and there's all kinds of information that now, it's like people aren't necessarily people posting pictures of their kids. They're not using keywords around parenting.
Yep.
And yet, all of a sudden, if you want to understand what it's really like to be a parent in any scenario today, or at least some kind of manicured version of it that people like sharing, then you can get an incredibly rich perspective on that. So I think we're still in the pretty early stages of I'd say of the major platforms. Pinterest is the furthest along with having a consumer application for it. So if you have the Pinterest app, you can take a look at any object, anything out there that you train your camera on, take a picture of it, and Pinterest will try to find things that look exactly like that picture.
Right.
So you can actually start doing some of that social listening via visual search just natively within the Pinterest app.
Oh, wow.
Their visual lens it's tremendous, and even for like some of the applications are just for shopping inspiration, but I think there'll be far more applications for market research as well. It's still though, like, for the most part, you have to be willing to invest in something like this, and even still, algorithms need a little bit more. They need a lot more help being trained on it. And then once you make the jump from images to video, some video analysis, for instance, just looks at the transcript of the video. That's not going to help with the objects that are in it. What's typical also is that a typical video is shot, even an amateur video, is 30 frames per second, which means that there's 30 times more information in a second of video than there is in an image. So usually there's some kind of sampling that goes on, and so you can do it that way. But it's a really tremendous problem that I'm sure a few years from now we'll have a conversation like this and it'll all seem like old hat.
Right, because I think I'm bored this intelligence for my wife. She's a computational neuroscientist, so that's what she's doing, image statistics, and basically try to use machine learning to understand how to really identify images that have the same statistics. So it has nothing to do with keywords. It's really try to find a cat, and by searching the statistics of a cat in terms of images. So it's a completely different ball game, and I'm sure it's going to trickle into social listening and the ability to analyze visual data with what we call unstructured data with no keywords, basically. So this is really a fascinating area, but for our marketers today, that are looking to run a campaign and get some pre-launch intelligence. They run the campaign, they got the results. What typically, are considered like common KPIs for social listenings that most marketers are after?
For the most part, you still get into a lot of basic, reach and frequency type metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't avoid that as the groundwork for everything. And I think the frequency area gets into some interesting realms, because, for instance, you can start segmenting individuals by reach and frequency, and when you do that, your definition of influencers change. A lot of the applications for social listening are in identifying influencers out there. Again, could be customer service, could be for more promotional marketing. And so if there's someone with with 1 million followers who mentions a brand one time, versus someone with 10,000 followers who mentions the brand on a daily basis, and also get collectively more engagement with it, then then which matters more. And I'm not saying there's even how phrasing that might have a bit of bias, but there are plenty of scenarios where it can kind of be a toss-up, but you can start looking at both, and then maybe even in your own outreach, right? If you're trying to have a more of a marketing mix and a diversified base of the kinds of people that you're dealing with, then you try and mix that and see what is performing best for your brand. What are those attributes of people who are talking about it that tend to make a difference? And maybe you can get away with a few high reach individuals. Maybe you need a whole swarm of very low reach but specialized people. But then you need to figure out, why am I doing this in the first place? What are those KPIs? Is it to get more engagement with my content? Is there going to be a sales hook? Is it, if you're a B2B marketer or even a B2C marketer, like a credit card company that might have a longer sales process, then if you have something like lead gen, some hook just to get people in the door,
right?
Then all of this can be, there are different ways that people are going to be using it. And then you have some that are just like, you know what, we just we don't care about getting too deep into this. If we're Coke, we want to have a bigger number than Pepsi, or vice versa, right? It's specific to any given marketer here. But you have plenty of those who are just like, they're using it for chest stuffing and
interesting.
and sometimes a little bit of internal prodding too, and saying like, hey, how come it looks like the other folks are doing so much better than we are, and we want to go and leapfrog that.
Yeah, so I imagine, a lot of competitive intelligence goes into this. So one brand wants, for example, to find out how they fare compared to their top 3 competitors on a certain topic. Then obviously you can create this picture of, your volume of discussion, conversation volume versus the other parts.
Well, yeah, I was at 360i when they worked on the whole Oreo Dunkin' Dark Super Bowl suite. And and it felt like every single customer was saying after that, we want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, real-time marketing, basically using those nuggets of catchphrases, and then you can just apply it immediately.
But they wanted the same success too.
It's like the novelty effect wears fairly fast, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So no, this is a great kind of walkthroughs to some of the great advantages of why you should build your social listening strategy. Can you give us now to bring the point home, some 1 or 2 examples of social listening cases that you think are really effective?
One that ties into something you were talking about before in terms of just trying to understand more about your audience or around, say, a product launch was so one customer of ours, Golin, they've done some tremendous work, and they were working with McDonald's, and so they used social listening to track anyone out there who had publicly shared that they wished McDonald's had breakfast all day.
Oh wow!
And so when McDonald's was finally ready to go and launch this, and then they went back to people, some of whom had brought this up years ago, and they were ready with all kinds of personalized content for them, and so just incredible ways to go and surprise and recognize the audience, and it's just like, without fail, anyone they were engaging with was just amplifying this over and over and over again. So they were using this built-in R&D is that they've been collecting over time, and so like they were ready, and a lot of that meant that people's first exposure to the McDonald's all-day breakfast menu was hearing it from others out there. It wasn't just from the news sources. It wasn't just from an ad campaign. So I think once you can start doing your homework like that and involve your consumers, your customers in that process, and it's like if someone's taking the time to share something like that, then they are very, very open to hear more from the brand. And so
it reminds me really that trend that was really hot a few years ago, those random acts of kindness.
The surprise and delight.
Exactly. So is this still, do you see it still applied today in the context of social listening and on the individual level, on those people that, as you said, really contribute in a big way to the brand?
I think not enough in the sense that, I think there are a lot of these quick wins that might sound, it might sound very complicated for brands to get involved with, but it's like, I mean, people still love this stuff, and a lot of the time, these are the kinds of stories that people are going to spread over and over again. So it's like, the work is just getting a bit of that infrastructure for it, just to go and make it happen. And then, so I think, we have a lot of these things that happen in cycles. You're going to see it with real-time marketing, see it with so many aspects of what people are doing. So there's still also, I think an opportunity is to just look back and see, there's plenty of stuff that has worked well over the past that, like, you don't always have to move on to the next thing right away, right? Go and stick to a lot of what works, and when you get to a lot of these emerging social platforms, and or if you're new to social media marketing or social listening, you want to start just inventing things from scratch, and most of the time you don't have to.
Right. There's also the aspect, I think, of audience maturity. I think, so they already, the sophisticated users know to expect, if they do something really outrageously positive, the brand will notice and do something in exchange. Then, so I think there is that, these up and coming influencers that know how to leverage that. So that's kind of interesting too. So when do you think, we kind of touched on it briefly before, but what do you think about where social listening is headed in the future? And, there's emergence of cognitive marketing systems, AI, machine learning, where basically the heavy lifting of configuring those business rules of your social listening programs will be done, mostly automatically. And so all this exchange of kind of extracting the intelligence is going to be automated. What do you think about where we headed right now with that?
Yeah, well, I think that I'm hoping there are some things about it that work a lot different in a couple of years from how it does now, and that includes setting up those parameters in the first place. It includes getting alerts. So alerts today are typically rules-based, and so you have 10% more mentions today than you get a notification about it. But what if every Wednesday morning, then you have these conversations spike by 10%? What if that's when people are engaging with your product or category? Then you don't need an alert for that. But if that's more of a seasonal thing and that comes, it starts cycling in and out, then you want to know if that's changing. And so I think there's a lot more of that intelligence that requires a lot of heavy lifting on the machine learning part to understand what normal is and then what a deviation from the norm. But I think things like that are what will help turn all this data into insights. And I think insight is an overused word when it comes to the whole social listening realm.
Right.
But I also think there are times when you do get to that insight. And so it's like, how do you make it so that you're not just stumbling on insights? How do you make it so that you're actually getting them more reliably?
Yeah, and also there's a lot of data sources that not necessarily come from social, right? There's a lot of third-party data sources that you want to integrate. So to your point, I totally see, the big challenge is really, or the benefit of automation and AI is really in crunching all this data. But at the end of the day, you want to communicate a human, authentic story that's relevant to a person at a certain stage of his life cycle at a certain moment. So the context is also important. So all these things, I think it's a balance between full automation and how you can still retain a sense of human communication.
For sure.
Yeah. So just so before we close, maybe now that we talked a lot about the process, the objectives, some examples, future, if a marketer listening to us now is interested in starting their own social listening programs, what would you say, like 3 main tips to get them started, things that they must consider?
So 3 main tips that they must consider. I think one is if you're just getting started, then you've got to think about how much historical data matters to you or how much it doesn't. This is so this right off the bat becomes a really interesting question and something for marketers to understand how much they need. Are they really just going to be looking in the here and now, or are they constantly go to look back and want to understand those trends from a year or more? It's a really important consideration. I think figuring out that pipeline for who is going to be on the receiving end of this information becomes really important. How do you bubble this up in a way, and how can you package this in a way in terms of getting, say, the CMO or CEO, other important people who are really on board with this, trying to find out what's the information that they will really care about, even ask them directly, and so make sure that there's some of that buy-in and that what you're presenting ultimately can have that kind of audience. And then I'd say the other piece of it, and goes back to a lot of this conversation, is just I have a goal and set an ambitious goal for it, right? Say that you make this try to work as hard for you as possible, almost to the point that you're getting someone, could be your agency, could be the tech platform, could be anyone involved along the way, that says, you know what, this just can't be done, but here's as close as we're going to get. Like, once you get that far, once someone tells you, nice idea, but this can't be done, then you probably push them hard enough. And then you can have the conversation of like, okay, how close can we get, but if it's just like if you just start asking for someone and someone's like, oh yeah, we'll run that report for you tomorrow, like, you're not pushing them hard enough. So so ask tough questions and then you'll force others, including like ourselves, to keep adapting to really what you need and what's going to make a difference in your job.
No, this is fantastic tips. I really like them. So the first one is really about the time frame. Just pick up, if it's the past and how far back, and maybe if you want to do it for the future, maybe it's a real-time tracking that you're interested in. So the time frame is important. And then you said also, which is very interesting, really about who is your audience. So this falls nicely into the data storytelling, how you tell your story to the person who's going to receive the report. So each audience has different requirements. And the last thing is definitely really make it an ambitious goal. That's nice to have, because it's going to compromise your program as a whole. So you want to reach something really aggressive, which is great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you so much for your time today. And before we close, how viewers or listeners can contact you if they have more questions?
I appreciate it. Well, sysmos.com and @sysmos is great. And then I'm on Twitter @dberkowitz. dberkowitz @sysmos.com. You could get to my blog at serialmarketer.net. So yeah, and I welcome questions. I welcome feedback. You know, a lot of the great benefits of having a conversation like this is that it just leads to new ideas and new conversations. So I look forward to hearing from anyone.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And for the folks listening or watching, this recording is going to be available on our website, on our channel. We're also going to syndicate this as an audio podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, and other channels. So until next time, don't keep your big story waiting too long.
Thank you.
Thank you.